Ukraine continues striking Russian defense industry, while a Russian pilot of a Tupolev 22 bomber that was responsible for striking civilian targets inside of Ukraine is getting killed deep inside of Russia, apparently by the GUR. We'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the front line, technical innovations, and much more in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Ukraine did a drone strike on the Lipetsk 2 airfield. According to eyewitnesses, there was fire and secondary explosions. The Ukrainians said that ammunition, fuel, and planes were the target. On the airfield, the Russians have Sukhoi 34 fighter bombers, Sukhoi 35 and MiG-31 that are stationed there. The Russians say they intercepted the drones, but a crashing drone started a fire on the ground, as we usually hear from the Russians this way. But what damage exactly was done is so far unconfirmed. So apparently something was hit, but we do not have much more than this. The defense industry was also struck in Sverdlov in Nizhny Novgorod. A factory that is producing chemicals for artillery ammunition was struck as well. The factory is not just producing chemicals, but they are also producing gliding bombs, and it was struck by the Ukrainians. The geolocation has shown that an explosion was visible in the direction of the factory, but that doesn't mean the factory itself was hit. It doesn't show exactly to which degree damage was done, etc. So as of now, I do not have any details how successful this Ukrainian strike has been. But we do know now that another strike the Ukrainians did was successful. The attack against the Kremny microelectronics factory in Bryansk was successful enough that the Russians have stopped producing. They're facing issues with both the electric supply inside of the building, as well as some production facilities. Some production machines must have been damaged. There are pictures now of the strike in the housing, and as you can see, it did visible damage inside of the building itself. That was the event that happened, and it started a fire that kept burning for a while. The Russians themselves struck back against the Ukrainians, and in one of the biggest strikes recently, on the night of the 19th, they used 98 Shahid drones in one single night. The majority of them have been taken down by the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians are reporting that the Russians are now starting to install cameras into the Shahid. The expectation, the guess is that they probably say better get some reconnaissance data from it than nothing, as the effectiveness of the Shahid in regards to damage on the ground is by now very, very limited. But on the other hand, obviously, if we mention that they barely ever hit anything they are meant to, this is because the Ukrainians put up a huge effort to intercept them, and that obviously fixes Ukrainian troops far behind the front line in air defense roles where they could otherwise be used differently. So even if the Shahids don't hit much along in regards to the infrastructure, they still have some effect. The Ukrainians and the Russians did a prisoner exchange, 95 for 95, and this time it was Azov-style defenders again, which have been prisoners of war since mid-2022. Some of them have been freed by now. And on the 18th of October, again in the direction of Pokrovsk here, the Russians have once again executed 2 Ukrainian prisoners of war. The Ukrainians have started a criminal investigation in this regard. Then we go to the developments here in Kursk, and we have Dva Mayors, the Russian mill bloggers. They are saying that there were Ukrainian attacks in the direction of Tyotkino and the town of Wolfinsky. This is here and here. They say that they managed to defeat them, and I do not have any sign that this is not true. So apparently, if there was an attack, this could obviously not be true, but I do not see that the Ukrainians had any success in the western part of Glushkovo. We have developments, though, here in the Ukrainian held areas, and there we have the The Ukrainian mill blogger Petrenko confirming that basically everything west and north of Olgovka is now in Russian hands. We see that here on the deep state map, also confirmed that this is lost. He's saying the majority of Olgovka is in Russian hands as well, but according to him, there might still be some presence. That's at least what Petrenko is reporting here. We do have the Ukrainians actually advancing too. In a little bit roughly until here. We have that geolocated, that the Ukrainians have popped up east of Cherkasskoye, Perechnoye, and north of Martinovka. This is, as you can see, roughly at this point the Ukrainians have operated recently when they were attacked by the Russians. We switch over to the Kharkiv region and there's nothing to report. Obviously there was fighting, there is activity there, so this is not a quiet front line, but no change in territory that can be reported. We'll switch over to the Eastern Front. We now have the deep state map finally admitting that some area west of Sinkivka is lost. Just to remind you, I've had geolocations roughly a month ago of the Russians already here, and roughly 2 weeks ago the Russians were already here. I will probably switch over from the deep state map fairly soon if this continues like this, because it seems they are no longer interested in showing the map, but this is a different story, so let's go on here in this direction. Where we do have changes though is that a Ukrainian counterattack happened inside of the town of Krylyakivka. We have geolocations here, and they are here, basically in this area here. This is here on the map, just to show you. This is the triangle on the roads that we see here. So the Ukrainians have operated basically in this area here in a video that was initially published and on the, I think the 18th. But since then the Russians have kept attacking, and we have a geolocation of them actually reaching the Oskil River, basically reaching it. They have been struck there. The video shows them suffering losses in moving material, in vehicles, IFVs, tanks, etc. But as of now, we see that the Russians have basically reached the river and cut off the north and the south. So they have cut the Oskil bridgehead of the Ukrainians in two. This is done by now. I do not see that anything has changed further than this. South of it, the Russians were successful west of Andrivka. They advanced by over a kilometer into the eastern part of Vishneve, and this is actually unpleasant for the Ukrainians because we do have a map here. This is Andrivka, and this is, do we see it now? Here is Vishneve. So we see that the Russians are now here on the ridgeline, which allows them, if we zoom out, easier advance towards north and the south in this direction here, as they manage to gain the ridgeline. So in both directions, in both these directions, the Russians will have an easier time now as they are on the ridgeline, and this will stabilize the front line here to a certain degree for the Ukrainians. Further south, we have the Russians showing some progress east of Terny. Not significant. They are here in the tree line in the contested area. Once again, we see activity here. Overall irrelevant, but we do see activity and a potential advance of them in this direction. Then we switch south of the Seversky Donetsk. Nothing to confirm. Not even down in Chasiv Yar, nothing in Klishivka and Andrivka. So over the last 2 days, the front line has, so far as we can tell, held at least until the Toretsk region. All of this here was obviously active. The front line was active here, but we do not see that anything has changed. Still though, inside of Toretsk, the Russians are once again successful. We have a geolocation of the Russians up here in the area. This is here on the map, and we had them in the past roughly up here, so the actual map by now should probably be like this, at the very least in the contested color. So gray, the gray zone should be moved up roughly until this here by now. They also have advanced in another place inside of Toretsk. Here we see them right to the east, northeast of the built-up areas here. So they are here now as well. We check this again. This was more or less here at this point. So the Russians are here now and they are here. So probably the contested area is more like this by now, at least if we connect the dots at this point. Obviously, there might still be Ukrainian presence down here. This is unclear as of now, but we see that the Russians have additional advances inside of Toretsk. And significantly too, we see advances between New York and Toretsk. The Russians are now down here, indicating once again that this is roughly at this point here. So the whole southern area here, it's unclear of the current situation of this, but we see the Russians advancing in this direction, and we see them advancing in this direction. Whether they will take that quarter or whether they will bypass it is unclear, because once again the deep state map is unfortunately not correct. The Russians are already up here, and they even have been in Leonidivka roughly 2 or 3 weeks ago. So this area here should be a gray zone as of now. So when we look at this, they're probably trying to bypass once again this quarter and achieve a turning maneuver. But we'll switch over to the direction of Pokrovsk, and here we have the Russian flags being the Russian flag being raised in Vozdyshenka, yeah, up here. It was raised up here on these buildings. We have a geolocation of this, and in those buildings here, I have read Ukrainian claims that they managed to push the Russians back, and the deep state map indicates that too, but I have not seen visual evidence of this. So it's possible that this is actually Russian held here, which would then mean that the contested area is probably roughly until this here, and that the Russians would still sit in the southeast of Vozdyshenka. Further to the southwest, we have news from the town of, where is it here? Selidove. Here the Russians managed to advance along the mine quite significantly. Actually, they are up to here by now. So this whole region here until this here is under, so this here is likely under Russian control, and where the gray zone begins is unclear, because we already had a geolocation yesterday at this point here indicating that the Russians managed to advance further. So this here is the mine that we see on the map, and they managed to advance south of it. Yesterday they were already in those buildings, which likely means that they are occupied and they have advanced further to the west in this direction. The Russians are also in the town of Soriane now. We have a geolocation of this as well, where they are down here. And this means that the whole pocket behind it is collapsed by now. We see the deep state map already showing it to a certain degree that the Russians are here. All of this was until a few days ago. We had a pocket roughly like this here. All of this is gone now. The Ukrainians have withdrawn towards the west, and it fell into Russian hands. Further south in the direction of Kurahove, we have actually the Russians already in Kurahove. These here, they are in the easternmost houses, and if I do not read the map incorrectly, then this is technically already Kurahove, as we see a continuous built-up area turning into the town itself. So this should be the Dachas of Kurahove, but it also means that everything east of it is very likely under solid Russian control by now, which means that the town of Maximilianivka has fallen to the Russians as of now. Maximilianivka is now in Russian hands as well. The Russians also managed to advance somewhat south of the town, here in the forested areas. They are in the third tree line after this here, so we see that they have reached this point here, and this is also under Russian hands, so they keep advancing towards Kurahove over the past few days. Further south, we have the Russians deeper in Katerinivka. This here shows us the map, and it shows us that the Russians are now in the northern part as well. They've also been geolocated in these tree lines here. So we have the Russians down here and roughly up here. Let me just quickly check. No, it's even on the main road towards the north. So they're already here at this point, showing that this area here is very likely solidly under Russian control by now, and the gray zone is probably like this by now, meaning that half of Katerinivka is probably in Russian hands as well. Further to the west, we have Russian activity, both down in the direction of Vuhledar as well as Velika Novoselka, the oblast border, and there are reported attacks by the Russians close to Robotyne, but I do not see any change in territory. So west of basically Katerinivka, I cannot confirm any change in territory over the last 2 days. We overall, we see the Russians having the initiative and increasingly pushing the Ukrainians back at Kursk. In Kharkiv, it's mostly stalemate, even though now and then we have one side gaining a few meters, but it's mostly stalemate. In the east, the Russians have had a bigger success reaching the Oskil and thus creating two separate bridgeheads south and north of their point where they reach the Oskil, which will obviously complicate Ukrainian logistics in that overall area, while they have reached the ridgeline here and will have an easier time advancing. Not much activity in the Siversk direction, and in Chasiv Yar, the Russians managed to bypass the city in the south quite a bit, and they gained a solid foothold in the quarter right next to the canal. Also not a good development whereas the Russians keep advancing in Toretsk and New York, even though we do not see anything fresh in New York over those past 2 days. Overall, the situation clearly shows the Russian initiative is fully back. The full strategic initiative is back with the Russians. The initiative where the Ukrainians gained it in Kursk seems to be over as of now. The Russians still suffer losses, though, and one of them is Colonel Golenkov. He was the commander of a unit of Tupolev 22 and 3 that are made responsible for an attack on the city of Dnipro in January 2023, where 46 people died. He was also, his unit was also made responsible for an attack on the Amstor Mall in Kremenchuk in June 2022. He was made responsible by that. The Ukrainians said he was responsible for that, and now there's a video showing him lying dead on the floor and somebody filming it, and it was published by the GUR, indicating that the Ukrainian military intelligence likely has killed that officer. According to the reports, he was likely bludgeoned to death with a hammer. I obviously can't show you the pictures in this regard, though. Then we have troop generation news from Russia. Russia is said to need an additional 1.5 trillion ruble to finance the war in 2024 alone. So the budget was basically, what is it, $15 billion too little for the payment of the war. The expenses have increased significantly for the Russians. Showing the financial trouble that is increasing for Russia. And Russia, for the first time, has taken away citizenship of naturalized citizens as they failed to register for the military service. This has now happened for the first time. We also have news from the Ukrainian side. Here we see a video of a Ukrainian FPV drone getting into contact, going after an enemy tank, and here you see that the video feed fails, indicating that the tank had electronic warfare, but at the same time a second drone sees it under fire. This is being interpreted that it basically had a lock-on KAI or something like this for the end attack, whereas the loss of connection to the drone would no longer stop it from hitting it. Whether or not this is true is unclear. Obviously, if the drone just managed to fly straight at this point, it would probably have hit it as well. But this is at least something that we can expect to see with more and more drones as electronic warfare is getting more and more spread around on both sides. Both sides obviously have the incentive to develop something to fight against this. One way to fight drones too is what we see here. We have the Ukrainians showing the construction of fortifications, and this shows us dragon teeth and anti-tank ditches, and they also start covering the trenches and shoveling earth on top of it, moving earth on top of it to protect against drones. We even see here, that's quite interesting, this is basically a bunker with sled armor. Also something that I have not seen before this war, at least I cannot remember it, but obviously this would mean that an FPV drone, that a heat shell generally would detonate before striking the bunker itself, and thus increasing its survivability. Then we have the Ukrainians showing that they have developed a drone specifically designed to hunt down Shahid drones. They can reach an altitude of 10,000 feet and a speed of 100 miles per hour. That's roughly 160 kilometers an hour. And with those, they want to hunt down the Shahid drones with these drones and increase their survivability and increase the shoot down range increase the national survivability. That's more or less what I meant. So basically they want to be more successful in shooting down the Shahid drones, whereas they already are successful to a certain degree. This would allow them to hunt the drones down much more effectively than rather than just hoping that they fly over an existing air defense unit. In the political sphere, we have news from the neighboring country of Moldova. Here in Moldova, there was an election yesterday, and the pro-Western president of Moldova, Maya Sandu, has won the first round, but she failed to gain over 50%, so she will have to go into a second round of the election, where she'll face off against a pro-Russian candidate, but at the same time with the slightest of margin. I think it was roughly 2,000 votes. The constitution was changed that now the official goal of Moldova is to join the European Union. And we have news about international support. The United States have announced another $400 million package. It includes ammo for HIMARS, 105, 155, artillery, 60, 81, and 120 mortars, TOW, anti-tank missiles, Javelin 84 as well, and M113 armored personnel carrier, and additional stuff. And we have news from South Korea. Apparently there the national army television said that South Korea is considering the direct delivery of 155mm shells to Ukraine in response to the North Korean deployment of soldiers, basically to respond to that, trying to create some deterrence towards Russia. South Korea by now has a significant defense industry, and its artillery shell production supposedly is roughly 250,000 shells a year. That's not the biggest at all, but it still would allow, obviously, for more artillery shells to be delivered to the Ukrainians. And that was it from me for today. If you like the situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, and leave a comment what you think about the current developments. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.